Well, I'm passionate about the idea that you need to be heard. And I want to stitch these stories together across the states. We're going to find the commonalities, and it's going to be really an amazing experience, and I look forward to you joining me on the Jar.
Oh, okay. Welcome. That's kind of cool, Amy.
Love it.
A
Got
little
to see the intro.
Yeah, I'm just starting to play with this. Is the software, and it looks like I have successfully hacked us into the broadcast. So welcome, Amy, to the show.
We are in the digital age.
I'm the boss now. So this is calling it the Jar. It's the Jar Foundation labeled right now. Okay. I'm going to change it to Mental Health Today.
Okay.
And it's going to be with Amy Mezulis, right? Did I get that right?
You did. Yeah. Perfect.
So Amy and I were just chatting offline, got a little of the backstory, and really excited to hear about what you're doing and about your aha moment, and kind of see where that takes us. As I mentioned before, when I was looking to see what you're working on now, the part that I really liked was the education, the skill set building, and those parts of what you're working on. And I just really believe that's a key to helping therapists, spend more time on the right stuff, and also for people to kind of help themselves and to learn and maybe even help each other along the way. So, Amy, who are you? And tell us about your aha moment.
Sure. So I am a clinical psychologist by training, and has spent most of my career in research academia. So I've been on the faculty of a small university here in Seattle, Washington for 17 years now. Wow. And have, of course, done all the normal academic things. I teach and done some administration and all that sort of thing. But most of what I've done is clinical research, and all of my research funded by the National Institutes of Health, the National Association for Research in Schizophrenia and Depression, the American Psychological Association. All of my research examines pathways to adolescent onset mental health problems. So why do teenagers get the mental health problems that they get? My particular nerdy academic interests are in pathways to depression and self-injury and suicide in particular, but also related things, anxiety. I've done a fair bit of sort of trauma outcomes among this age group as well. And so the aha moment, what gets us from that, I was doing that for years.
That's okay. That's good.
There's a couple of aha moments. So I think probably the current story starts in about 2019, middle to end of 2019. And at this time, I'm in year 14, 15 of being in academia. I am department chair, which sounds really impressive and is really mostly just a horrible job, which is a lot of administrivia and not that much sort of direct teaching.
Okay. Really far away from what you love more and more.
And I'd had 2 back-to-back federal grants from 2013 through 2019. I had federal funding to do research, which was awesome and exciting. It also meant I was a little bit sort of had some grant fatigue, right? I'd been collecting data. And I love research. Research is also a lot of work. And I'm now sitting on a mound of data. And I had that academic ivory tower moment where I was like, am I doing anything that matters? Is what I'm doing matters? I write these papers that, as far as I can tell, the same 20 people in my field read I read their papers, right? But is it actually meaningfully doing anything to solve what was really apparent to me was a teen mental health crisis? That was why I went into the field. In 2019, I'm also the mom to a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old, 2 daughters. And my kids had just 2 years before that, they had lost their father. So they'd had their own sort of mental health journey. So I'm parenting these teenagers who are dealing with all the stuff of adolescence. I'm in academia doing research in teen mental health, and I'm feeling this stuckness. Is anything that any of us in academia are doing matters? And at the time, I thought I'd solve it, honestly, by going into private practice. I was licensed. And I'm I'll just start seeing clients again. That'll make me feel more in touch with having an immediate impact. And I did do that. But I also at the same time got connected to sort of a friend of a friend, a colleague of a colleague, to a man named Josh Hurst. And Josh was an entrepreneur in residence at a startup studio here in Seattle called Pioneer Square Labs. He's a longtime tech entrepreneur. I mean,
Okay.
straight up tech product guy,
Yeah.
right? Like nothing to
Okay.
do with mental health. But he's had this sort of passion for social mission driven tech companies. He'd created a company called Walk Score on walkability of neighborhoods that he'd sold. And he was thinking about sort of his next act. And he also is the parent of 2 teenagers, was really compelled by this data on this teen mental health crisis. And he's like, maybe I could use my tech background to innovate there. Sounds really cool. I don't know anything about teen mental health. And he's talking to our mutual colleague, Greg Gottesman, who is one of the founders of Pioneer Square Labs. And Greg says, I know someone who knows something about teen mental health. And so literally in the fall of 2019, this is what happened, is that Josh and I just get in a room and we start going, teen mental health is a real problem. I'm like, yeah. He's like, do we know what to do about it? I'm like, heck yes, we do.
Yeah. Okay.
A lot. We know what causes teen mental health problems. We actually know what treats teen mental health problems. The knowledge isn't the problem. The problem is connecting the dots, and the problem is reducing a lot of barriers to access to care. And happy to talk about that. And so we put our heads together and jointly founded this company, which is now called June Care. It had a different name earlier. And we had no idea. You have to appreciate this is fall of 2019. Okay. We have no idea about what is to come, right? Like, we're playing around with these ideas. We've got a app that has a video and that's about it. And we're like, we'll think about it and maybe late in 2020, launch and do something. And then COVID hits. And we're located in Seattle, and COVID hit Seattle really hard.
Yes. Yeah.
Locked down really quickly. And that meant a couple things on both sides of the clinical equation. We had a lot of teens and young adults who couldn't get access to healthcare.
Yes.
It took a little while for things to go virtual, right? It wasn't like this happened overnight. Most practitioners who were used to doing things in person had to kind of think about how to do this.
Oh, yeah.
But you also had clinicians who couldn't deliver care, right? Clinicians who are trained, but their clinics are physically closed. And we're like, we can connect those dots. We can start connecting clinicians with teen and young adult clients and kind of just go. And so we had an idea, but we were actually using third-party software for video for our therapists. And we had a one feature mobile app for our clients, which was a video platform. And we started actually serving clients. But, fast forward now, this is 3 years ago. What I'm doing with most of my time is functioning as the chief clinical officer of this company, June Care. And what June Care is doing is trying to solve some of that problem of the teen mental health crisis and how do we get teens to access care by using technology to make mental health care more accessible and more engaging for a population that has a lot of need, but can sometimes be a little bit resistant to engaging in care. And happy to talk about any of that. But that's a little bit of introduction about sort of how I got here. I'm a little bit of like a nerdy academic who ended up running a tech company. And that was all mostly accidental, except that it's really exciting. And
crazy.
The thing, that aha moment that you were talking about is like this, I want to do something. I don't want to just think about a problem anymore. I want to do something about the problem. And that's really at the end of the day, I think, what the aha moment was.
Yeah.
And this company is one way. We're not the only company innovating, but one way in which we can sort of bring innovation to a problem that's a real meaningful problem.
Just the fact that you were in the same place at the same time and somebody connected you. Just magic, right?
Totally. Kismet.
There are no coincidences. And
no, and at the right time of life, right? Like if you'd asked me 2 years earlier, I would have been like, I'm too busy. I'm in the middle of a federal grant, and 2 years later, COVID would have, we would have sort of missed a boat on sort of the massive innovation that's been happening in healthcare in the last couple of years. So really fortuitous in many ways.
Yeah. You'd have been pushing a rock up a hill. I mean, with telemedicine, with teens,
totally.
But now, look, we're talking about mental health digitally, and probably you wouldn't have done this, 2 years ago.
The willingness to accept that teletherapy is a totally valid and good way to deliver healthcare, to deliver mental health care specifically, is really now very widely accepted, and it definitely was not 3 years ago. So
you mentioned there was a cool, interesting term. Maybe cool term is the wrong one, but interesting term about kids. The pathways to the
Sure.
resistance of the pathways you called it? What did you call it
Yeah.
on the road to care?
What I study is, pathways
Yeah.
to mental health disorders, right? So
Yeah.
how is it that we take, you know, some fun facts for you. So 75% of all mental health disorders onset by age 24. So when we talk with adults who have depression or anxiety or bipolar or anything, the vast majority of them did not have their first episode as an adult. They
Yes.
had their first episode as most often a teenager.
Interesting.
They may
Okay.
not have known it, right? They
Right,
may not
right,
have known
right. They
it. They may
did
not have
right.
gotten treatment,
Yes.
but the adolescent time period, sort of age 10, kind of that pre-adolescent tween years to about age 24, is when the vast majority of mental health problems onset for the first time. And it makes sense if you know anything about adolescent development, like there's a time of, I
Yeah.
mean, there's massive biological changes happening. There's a lot of changes in social context. There's a tremendous amount of brain restructuring happening, all of which impacts emotional experience and emotion regulation. So it makes
Mm.
sense, like when you know all that, to be like, this is a period of like a lot of adjustment. And so sometimes until all those kinks get worked out, we might
Yeah.
see some problems. But it also means, so it's a time period where we see rates of depression, rates of anxiety, suicidality, they just skyrocket. And that's what I've always been interested in. How do we know? How can we look at age 10 or age 12 at a kid who seems to be functioning fine? How can I know which
Yeah.
16-year-old is going to be suicidal?
Yeah, you
How can
don't
I see that? That's been kind of what I've been interested in most of my career.
I I think if we've got the knowledge, if I knew at 12 and 14 that, my brain does this stuff and, this is what it's gonna be like, um, those tools probably help, right? I mean,
Well, the great thing about the
w
adolescent time years, those teen years, is that brain restructuring works both ways, right? It's a period of risk, but it's
yeah.
also a period where you're much more able to build good skills,
Yes. Yeah,
right? Like it's an
absolutely.
age where you're much more receptive, your brain is much more plastic. And if you could learn in those years how to regulate your emotions, how to
Right.
communicate effectively, how to tolerate stress, right? If those things that are really excellent life skills, you're much more able to learn them as a teenager than you are at our age.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you have the potential to offset some of those trajectories, right? Or,
Yeah,
or
that's what
soften them a little bit. And
yes.
that really is the heart of what we do. Like teenagers are this great age group because I mean, there's a chunk of them who have already really serious and meaningful mental health problems.
Mhm.
And it's a terrible mental health crisis among teens in the US right now. But we also have teens who are on the path there, but not quite there yet. And gosh, wouldn't it be nice? Like, we want to treat the ones who already
Mhm.
have mental
Yes.
health problems, but wouldn't it be nice if we could also offset that likelihood for the ones who are still on a path to it but haven't
Yep.
arrived there yet? So that's, to me, what is good about mental health care in that age group is you had the potential to do both of those things.
Yeah, and I think the awareness part will help a lot of them on that, to stop that pathway, right? They're on that road, and how do you give them a little bit of a tool to kinda nudge
Absolutely.
themselves back on the right road? It's if you've got the awareness, which was not around,
Mhm.
and if you've got some tools and
Mhm.
skills, you learn skills,
Mhm.
yeah, I think you could help a lot of people, not self-care, if you end up a
It's a
situation you need
form of
help,
self-care though.
but
Yeah,
I guess it
a
is self-care, and
no,
it's
and
not
actually, like the most dominant model of mental health treatment for teens, young adults, and adults is something called cognitive behavioral therapy. And the idea of cognitive behavioral therapy, which
Yep.
is the most evidence-based psychotherapy, right, for depression, anxiety, self-injury, pretty much anything you want to name, is that the whole point is that you teach the client
Yeah.
how to do all these skills themselves. Like we put ourselves out of a job. A good cognitive behavioral therapist makes themselves useless because what
Yeah.
we want to do is give all those
Yeah.
skills to the person so that they can do them themselves. So that
Yeah.
is a form of self-care, right? So like right now it's
Yep.
treatment, but a year from now when I'm struggling with the same issues again, I now have the tools myself to take care of
Yeah.
myself. So
Yeah.
it's a both and, I think,
To keep you
for
from
this
the
age
treat
group.
yeah, I guess that was a lot of the steps, right? That self-care to avoid into a situation where you need treatment.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a company, really interesting set of guys on, the founders
Hmm.
for Chimney Trails,
Okay.
and it's a CBT in a box,
Cool. Yeah.
kind of a
Digital
exercise.
therapeutic. Yep. Yep.
It's a physical, like, exercise you go to, like, go start a campfire
Wow.
and and
Okay.
and then
Yeah.
they have a pamphlet on that exercise.
Sure.
And so they've got, I guess it's 10, is it 10 traditional CBTs or
Sure.
something like
That
this?
sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah, and they got like 10 or 12, what I forget it is. And
Yep.
then
And
there's
sort of what
layers.
underlies those activities? What is it you're
Yeah,
learning, right? That
exactly.
you
And
can
then they've
take as
got
a
the
lesson.
depths. Yeah, and you go
Yeah, I
back to
like it.
lesson 1 or
Yep.
CBT 1, and there's levels to it, I guess. I didn't get too far in, but really cool.
It's very cool. It's very
Clever.
powerful.
Yeah, very. I mean, I'm a tactile person too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I did like that idea of something physical in the lesson, right? An exercise. It was really fun.
Well, and I think, some of the magic sauce of what we're doing at June is making the skill building part of therapy relevant and
Yeah,
engaging for an age group
yeah,
that um, has a lot of mental health problems, but it's not necessarily the easiest thing for them to go and access care, right?
yeah.
You can lead a horse dying of thirst to water and you still cannot make it drink. And teenagers are like that. And the more an adult says to a teenager, drink the water,
Oh yeah.
I mean, we don't have teenagers to know the less the teenager is going to want to drink. What we have to do is make the water, really sparkly and really wet
Yeah.
and really engaging, right? And I think that's a big piece of what, we're trying to do is the old model of therapy, right? Where you were going to I mean, this is what, 5 years ago, if you had a teenager who needed therapy, you're going to take a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, with anxiety, right? Massive social anxiety. And we're going to go stick them in a room with an unfamiliar adult for 50 minutes and say, talk about it. Like, teenagers are like, you've got to be kidding me.
I'm just mortified at that
It's
idea,
mortified.
right?
And by the way,
So-
you get to drive with your parent
No,
in
this
the
is
car
right.
for 20 minutes to the therapist's office and home, while mom is like, what are you going to talk to your therapist about today? Make sure you tell your therapist about this that happened to school this week. And then you come out after, what did you talk about? Right? And you're like, no wonder kids didn't want to do this.
I have anxiety just thinking about that.
And so, I mean, teletherapy has just been, it's been life-changing for a lot of teens because the symptoms that get in the way of their being able to make use. I mean, there's two things about that traditional model that don't make sense for teens. One, teens don't sit and talk to an adult face to face ever. Like, they don't like to raise their hand in class. Like, they might have a 5-minute conversation with a teacher or a coach, but they don't just sit down and talk with an adult. Like, that's just not a mode of interaction that they have. And not their peers, and definitely not adults. But the other one is they're also not used to doing things verbally live like that. They're used to having their technological tools to engage. This is how they do class now. They're doing labs on their computer. I have a daughter who's a math major. She doesn't even have a workbook. She does it all she has a pen that she uses on her laptop that turns it into equations that she submits digitally. Like, they're used to using their technology for engaging with content, for engaging with people, for engaging in building skills like at school. And so part of what we're trying to do at June is bring that what we know about the teenage experience and how they learn and engage with material so that therapy is relevant for them, because it's obvious that the need is there and it's obvious that the therapy skills will help, but you got to make the horse drink the water, so.
Yeah. And I think this has got to be mass. What are the mental health crisis for teens? You look at the data. I mean, I was like,
it's appalling.
Whoa. It's blown up.
Yeah.
And any idea
It's pretty
what
bad. Yeah, I mean, so look, there was a mental health crisis before COVID. I mean, this is not actually entirely new. We had, for the 10 years previous to COVID, we had seen depression rates had increased by about 40%. Suicide rates had increased by almost 40%.
These
as
are
well.
Big numbers. This is people thinking 40%.
Yeah. So as of, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago, suicide became the second leading cause of death for 10 to 24-year-olds. The number one cause of death being accidental deaths by things like firearms, but we don't need to go there. But, COVID really accelerated this crisis, and also I think put more attention on it because we took away from teenagers a lot of the supports that they had in school and peers. And so we
definitely
see,
exasperated.
And, and I'm happy to talk about sort of why I think we have that kind of a mental health crisis, if that's helpful. But, the CDC just put out data. They do this youth risk behavior survey every year. And they just put out the data for 2021. So it's the first year, and they survey hundreds of thousands of high school students in the US.
Okay.
And the numbers were unbelievable. So 10%, 1 in 10 high school students made a suicide attempt in 2021.
This is what I just,
Not suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
Made a suicide attempt. Did a behavior in which they intended to die. Okay. Teenage girls, 30% considered suicide. 20% have experienced sexual violence. 1 in 5 sexual violence by the end of high school. We're not even talking about all the way into college.
Yeah, you're not even.
We're not even there yet. This is high school students. 60% of them are reporting persistent symptoms of depression. And then you look at, some populations that have really accelerated, discrimination and barriers to care. The LGBTQ population, astronomical. So we're talking over 70% reporting depression, 22% with an attempted suicide. And that's compared to, that's more than 3 times higher the rate of suicide attempts than sort of heterosexual cisgender high school students. More than 3 times the rate. And so, COVID really did a number on teen mental health for sure. I think the question you were starting to ask is kind of, what is it that's contributing, and is any of that useful information?
There's never just one thing, right? There's never just one thing, but is it social media is it?
Yeah. So let me tell you the rubric
or what
that
is the impact? I think we all would say,
social media.
This is for sure something.
And I'm not actually, interestingly, can I come back to social media?
Absolutely.
So
I'll let you
big
run with
picture,
it.
stepping all the way back.
Yep.
Any single one of us, teen, adult, can have mental health symptoms.
Yes.
If this particular sort of teeter-totter gets imbalanced, and what the teeter-totter is the stress that we have to deal with and the resources that we have to deal with it, right? So if I take, I was just telling you the story. So if I take my kids are a good example. I have a 20-year-old and 17-year-old. They both lost their father when they were 15 and 12. My 12-year-old had a lot of pre-existing challenges with depression and anxiety. She'd already, but before her father was even died, she had a therapist. She was on medication for anxiety. She has a lot of risk. My other one, my 15-year-old, one of the, you would have looked at her and been like, she is the most psychologically sound person you have ever met. Had just never had a problem in her life, really strong and steady. But you give both of them this massive stressor, right? Let's have your dad die. That's a pretty big stressor. You know who did better? Not better. They both struggle. Don't get me wrong. No one comes out.
No one.
But my kid, who had already been in therapy, had some skills. She knew how to ask for help. She knew how to say, I'm sad. She knew how to say, I'm struggling. She knew that it was okay to ask for help. My 15-year-old, who had never had anything really bad happen to her before and had never had to use any skills, didn't have any skills. And she really struggled for a year.
Interesting.
Really struggled.
You saw real live part of your research.
It made sense to me. Yes, this is because they had the same stressor, right?
Yes, yeah,
they
absolutely.
had different resources to cope with it. Yes. And resources are lots of things. Some of those are risk factors, like you have a genetic risk, right? To depression, to anxiety. You have a lack of family support. You have a lack of social support. But some of them are also internal resources. How do I know, like the skills we were just talking about? And so big picture, when I look at the sort of consistently climbing rates of adolescent mental health problems, what I see big picture is an increase in stress overall for this age group, right?
Actually, yes.
All sorts of stuff, social media, but also things like statistically, it's harder to get into college now than it was 20 years ago. There are 10 times more applicants for a college pool that hasn't increased, right? So we have a much more competitive, intense college prep, high school experience.
Yeah, right.
We've got all this social pressure around body image, around achievement in sports or other extracurriculars. Those stressors have gone up for high school students. We have social media. We have news that has really made the world's problems, climate change, war, right there on their screens all the time in a way that you and I did not when we were growing up. You kind of knew about the news, maybe your parents had it on at dinner time. It was not 24/7 around you. So we've just layered stress. And simultaneously, I think we are really underserving our kids in helping them build resources. We tend to be a little overprotective of our younger children. We don't want
We
them to
there has been a
experience
bit of that in this
a little
generation.
bit.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
don't really want them to experience stress or loss
yeah,
or failure. But the thing is, it's only when you experience those things that you learn those skills to handle it,
yeah.
right? And so we're throwing teenagers into this massive stress, really under resourced to handle it. And that's where I think
Interesting.
you see some of the new like waves around social emotional learning at school, all these buzzwords, but that's the underlying hypothesis is you got to learn how to cope with stress before we're going to dump all the stress on you. And so we have an under-resourced population
Yeah,
that
got
we're
this.
like massively dumping stress on. And yes, social media is definitely a piece of that increase in stress. The thing that I'll say, the thing I always want to caution about, there is nothing on God's green earth that is perfectly black and white, and social media is one of them.
For sure.
It has
Yeah.
it has a lot of dark side to it. It also, though, if you think about if you are a trans or gay student in rural Texas, rural Tennessee, and you don't have a supportive family and you definitely don't have peers in your community, social media is a place where you can connect
Yeah,
with
it's
a
your
peer
only
group,
place to connect.
and so it's been a both and the data supports that social media is a mechanism for social support seeking among this age group as well. Now it's also
Interesting.
a mechanism for exacerbating, FOMO and body image issues. And some of those peer networks get really toxic, right? You get on this peer network and there's a bad apple in the bunch that comes in and is like, yeah, if I was you, I'd just kill myself. And you're like, really? Was that a necessary thing to say to another teenager who's struggling? So, like, all the bad stuff happens, don't get me wrong. And there is a good side
Yeah,
for
some good
many
side.
people who don't have other ways of connecting with people. So, I'm one of those, like, I kind of want a middle ground on social media. I want well educated kids, but most importantly, I want confident, self secure kids who can interact with social media in ways that don't damage their mental health. That's what I want.
Yeah, and I think Amy, you're doing that. I mean, through the app, right? Through June, you have a chance. Like you said, I'm not a big censorship person in general, right? And
No.
like going back on stuff. I prefer overwhelming stuff with the right way.
Hmm.
Making the right way, and it's usually the right way ends up being the more fun, the more brilliant, the smarter way to go. People figure it out eventually. And so, yeah, social media, like you said, there's good stuff and
There's a
bad stuff
dark
out
side,
there.
but there's also a light side to it.
And
Yeah.
let's just put more good stuff out there and, places where people
And
will want to
build
hand out.
build digital IQ, help
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
help kids learn how to interact with social media tools
Yes.
effectively.
Yeah.
We've learned a lot. I mean, I think it's not a perfect parallel, but like, you know, the data has been really clear that, when you went to try to do abstinence programs in high schools, right? And that the only message was just simply don't have sex. What happens is you have more unplanned pregnancies.
Yeah.
Because what you don't do is provide it's a natural desire.
Yeah.
There's natural desires that people have, including teenagers, and they have a natural desire for social media, just like they have a natural desire for sexual
Yes.
connection. And so people are going to act on their needs and desires. What you want them to do is make good decisions
Yeah.
about it and decisions that don't create harm. And that's the education piece that I think you were talking about is how
Yeah.
can we educate an age group about smart and safe consumption of social media.
That's it. And it's the more we put out there that allows them those tools and allows that education to happen. Because it's got to be engaging. It's got to be the right way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're telling them as a
Yeah, and I
parent,
will
it's
say, like,
harder. It's a harder bridge to cross as a parent.
the barriers to mental health care in the US right now are not just around engaging in technology. I mean, there's we have challenges with supply, we have massive challenges with cost, we have challenges with
Yeah.
stigma. There's a lot of other barriers to accessing mental health care for teens and young adults. And I hope that we at June are trying to sort of meaningfully use innovation to break down those barriers across the board, not just around engagement, but also around other things that get in the way, like cost and like stigma, right? You can't even get someone in the room if cost and stigma are a barrier. Once they're in the room,
Absolutely.
you need tools to engage them, but you also got to get them in the room. There has to be a therapist in that room. You have to have supply, and you got to have someone able to afford it, and you got to have someone willing to do it, willing to ask for help. And those are about stigma and other issues in the field. So
Yeah, it's no wonder we can see the rates going up because, I mean, those are all some real challenges right
The
there.
stress is going up faster than our solutions, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, exactly. It is.
Yeah.
Well, and so I'm sure at some point you felt like once you know what you've got feels good and feels right, and you're helping people, are you having like moments of panic? Like, I can't get it out fast enough. How do more people find out? Or
I always I have
the
such a
sense of
sense of
urgency, sense
urgency
of
that is
urgency.
hard
Right.
because there's, we're startup, like it's
Yeah,
things
you're
like,
right.
we need, right? I mean, in order to move to more states or update the app
Right.
faster or innovate on the therapist side of what we do for delivery of care,
Yes.
all that requires engineers and product managers and people. All those people need salaries, and to pay those salaries, we need funding, right? You know what I mean? Like there's all these steps in a startup to do the thing that needs done.
Yes. Yeah.
But there's a lot of steps between the need and the execution of it, and we're still pretty early days, in that.
Okay.
But I think we have a vision of what could be for an age group that really needs some new ideas, and so we're plugging away at that.
Let's put it out in the universe. What do you need? What do you need to go faster and to do it the right way?
Oh, I
And
mean,
what do you need?
we're a startup heading into our Series A fundraising. I mean,
Okay.
we need bodies. We need engineers. We
You
need,
need engineers.
we need humans to, and humans that can use technology. We've been playing around a lot with Chat GPT and fun things, but you still need humans to use the technology right now. But we just need resources to grow like
Okay.
anywhere else. And then I would say the second thing we need is, and what we're working on right now is partnerships with payers, right? People can't afford mental health care out of pocket. It's too expensive.
Yes.
And you can't really reduce those costs because you have to build the platform and you got to pay therapists. I mean, there's
No,
meaningful costs,
yeah,
right?
there's real
So what
costs.
you really need to do is partner with health plans and payer organizations that
Yes.
help offset the cost of healthcare for their members, right?
Yep.
And so we're working through a process of partnering with health insurance companies and payers, EAP, right, employee assistance programs, and health insurance
Ah,
companies, so that they're assuming the cost, right,
yes.
or a significant portion of the cost for their members, and that's how you make care accessible,
Yep.
right? None of us goes to a specialist. If we have diabetes or we have a new cancer diagnosis, or we need to have a minor surgical procedure, we don't go and pay out of pocket. We go
No.
through our health plan with a
Yes.
copay. And
Yes.
mental health care has to be accessed in that way too
I,
for most people to make it affordable, which means we have to have those partnerships. So, those are pieces of the things that we're doing.
I think that's the White House signed, or Biden signed, a kind of a 7-point plan. I think it's roughly 7
Mhm.
points, something like that. And one of the key pieces of it's like a strategic initiative to reduce mental health, to
Mhm.
address mental health crisis. And that one around medical companies,
Mhm.
medical insurance, particularly
Yep, health insurance
add,
covering mental health care. Yeah.
adding, bolting it in, not onto, but putting it into the
As an
schedules.
essential feature.
Yeah,
Yeah,
as this into the schedules, just like you said,
absolutely.
like seeing your primary
Yeah.
care
And so
physician.
that is true on many health plans. I mean, mental health benefits are never quite as robust as medical health benefits still, and it'd be nice to see improvement there. But those partnerships just need to happen. And I would say the last thing you asked what needs to happen is, because the President Biden thing made me think of it, is right now, all healthcare is regulated on a state by state basis,
Oh yeah, yeah,
which makes, just access really
yeah. It's just
challenging
it's
because you've got
ridiculous.
state licenses, the age of consent, the qualifications for state licensure vary, times 50. And so you're
Bananas.
just exacerbating a chronic
Abs-
supply demand problem, right? You've
yeah,
got these rural areas. Like, I have therapists in Washington state with capacity, and my neighboring state, Idaho, which is, a rural state which lacks therapists
yeah,
supply but has demand. I mean, they've got teenagers, but my Washington therapist can't treat my Idaho patients, right? Because, right, even though they're like, sometimes they're literally, I mean, you think about places
yeah.
like
Like 50. Yeah,
Spokane,
50.
right,
Yeah,
where you're like literally you're minutes away from the other state. And so that is just, and there's some legislation pending to make that
yeah. I've heard there are the
easier,
15.
but
50, yeah, it
there's
takes.
some compacts, but they're still vary by license. They still have to be ratified by each state, et
Okay.
cetera, et
Yeah,
cetera.
yeah.
So, there's regulatory barriers as well. That's not necessarily something that my company can advocate for, but it's one of those things that
Why don't we get
impacts
the
how
regulators?
quickly.
Why don't we get the
What?
regulators? Let's get the regulators on the call.
Absolutely.
Shit, howdy. If that's something we could do that would sort stuff
We're
out.
working on it. Yeah. I mean, it's, there are these cross-state compacts. Psychologists are going through one right now. It covers 34 states. So like I can go through one process and get licensed in 34 states. But it's a different process if you're a mental health counselor, and it's a different process if you're a social worker, and each of those is separate legislation. Right? I mean, right. You're just
and it's
why is this so hard?
Well, yeah, I was an insurance agent back in California, and it was for a broker, and we had contracts with insurance companies across the U.S. So at one point I was licensed in 40 states.
Wow, right.
And so every certificate was different. Every application was different.
Everything's different. And
just
health providers
bananas.
have to, and maybe you did too as an insurance broker, we have to have continuing education. We have to update our license every year. We have to pay a fee and demonstrate ongoing education. Like every time you add a state to that, right? So anyways, it's stuff like this that has made innovation in healthcare has been very slow. And innovation specifically in mental health care has been sloth-like slow. And I do think there's companies like ours. We're not the only company trying to innovate in this space, but I do think it is companies like ours that are pushing that pace of innovation a little bit faster, so that we can catch up with kind of what the rest of the world, what the rest of other industries are using technology for.
Well, awesome conversation. And I think we got some really great aha moments, and I think some really good, you've given me some good ideas and kind of validated a couple things I'm thinking about. Amy, thank you so much. June is
Ken.
cool.
Thank you. June is cool.
We put it out there in the universe, Series A. I mean, we're
manifesting.
We're absolutely manifesting. I'm all about that. Thanks everybody for listening. And we got some comments. We got one thumbs up. I'll take that.
Awesome. Love it. My email is
how do they find you?
Amy@june.com. So AMY@June is JOON.com. And I'm always happy to answer questions. I do a lot of public psychoed, I'm super passionate about this space, adolescent mental health, and trying to just get more help to more teens. And so anyone who has questions or is looking for ideas, Amy@June.com.
Love it. Thanks, everybody. And Amy, hang on for a second.
Okay.
I'll be right